Be dispensed with?
Without objection.
Madam President, child exploitation, sexual exploitation, is one of the most heinous and persistent crimes our country and indeed the world faces today. Just yesterday, the FBI issued a national public safety alert in response to the explosion in financial sextortion cases in which children and teens are coerced into sending explicit images online and then extorted for money. In the last year, more than 3,000 minors have become victims of this crime. I'm proud of everything Congress has done and continues to do to combat sexual exploitation, particularly of minors in all forms, especially human trafficking. Just last night, the Senate unanimously passed the Abolish Human Trafficking Reauthorization Act, which I introduced with Senator Klobuchar. I hope we can pass another bipartisan bill today to increase the punishment for those who exploit and recruit America's children into the sex trade. A 2018 survey reported that 55% of young sex trafficking survivors in Texas were trafficked while at school or on school activities. 60% of trafficked adults were first groomed or solicited for trafficking on school campuses. Senator Klobuchar introduced the NTZ Act to increase the punishment for human trafficking in school zones or at school-sponsored events. Two of my fellow Texans have introduced a companion bill in the House, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and Congressman Michael McCall. I appreciate their leadership on this legislation, and it's my conversations with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee which have brought us to this point. And having passed the House, this is our last chance, I believe, for both the Senate and the House to have cleared the bill and send it on to the President for his signature. The NTZ Act passed the House unanimously in September, and I hope it can finally pass the Senate today and head to the President for his signature. So, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 7566 and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that its bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President, reserving the right to object. Madam President.
The Democratic whip.
Thank you. Madam President, first, let's state clearly for the record, neither the senator from Texas, nor the senator from Minnesota, nor this senator from Illinois wants to make it easier for these crimes to be committed. We are all committed to the same goal of reducing the number of crimes and making certain that those who are responsible pay the price for that misconduct, that terrible, disgusting misconduct. I've worked with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for years to help combat the scourge of human trafficking and to keep children safe from sexual exploitation. Preventing human trafficking and protecting survivors are issues that really do bring us together, Republicans and Democrats. The goal of this legislation is noble: to ensure that schools are a safe place for children where traffickers cannot prey on their innocence. I wholeheartedly agree with this goal. We should be doing everything we can to deter traffickers, especially those who prey upon school children. However, I cannot ignore the serious concerns about specific wording in this bill that is part of the legislation proposed. In particular, the Department of Justice, responsible for prosecuting these crimes of child sex trafficking, has identified a number of serious problems with the way that the No Trafficking Zones Act is written. They've sent us a memo. It is a lengthy memo, at least 4 to 6 pages of detailed analysis of this bill. I asked them to take it seriously and give us their serious report. They did. In technical assistance provided to the sponsors of this legislation, including to the senator from Texas, the Department of Justice concluded that, quote, "This proposed legislation will only create confusion and additional hurdles for sentencing child sex trafficking offenders." Listen carefully. The Department of Justice, that has the responsibility of prosecuting these crimes, analyzed this proposed change in the law and said it would create confusion and additional hurdles for actually sentencing those guilty of child sex trafficking. I'm sure the senator from Texas did not have this intent, nor the senator from Minnesota. The Department of Justice also said the legislation is not, quote, well-tailored, close quote, to address child sex trafficking, and that, quote, it is unnecessary since both statutes implicated already allow for a sentence up to life imprisonment. In other words, according to the Justice Department, this bill in its current form will not lead to stiffer sentences for these horrible offenses, and in fact may make it harder to prosecute child sex traffickers. In light of these concerns, I've repeatedly offered to work with the author of this bill in the House of Representatives. My staff has communicated that we could revise this bill and expedite its passage into law. We could meet the same noble goal of the original legislation, but do it in a way that is consistent with the express concerns of the Department of Justice. The changes needed are really quite simple. Instead of amending the applicable statutes, the amended legislation would ensure that the sentencing guidelines account for child trafficking that was committed in a school zone. This simple revision guarantees that the recommended sentence for a defendant will be higher if the defendant knowingly committed the offenses in a school zone. It also resolves all of the infirmities identified by the Department of Justice that could jeopardize prosecutions of child sex traffickers. I want to make it clear, I take this matter very seriously, as I'm sure the Senator from Texas and Senator from Minnesota do. We watched carefully as the Department of Justice sent their analysis. We responded to it in a responsible way, and we said to the House author of the bill, please accept these changes. They achieve your original goal and do it in a way that will not make it more difficult to prosecute those who are guilty. Unfortunately, so far, the author of this bill in the House of Representatives has refused to work with us on these changes. Their position is that we cannot change a single word of the bill. That is not the approach to take when we're dealing with legislation in such a serious matter. We should take care that every word achieves the goal that we all want to seek, to lessen the number of crimes of sex trafficking. As a result, we're at an impasse, because I'm unwilling to pass legislation that the prosecutors tell us will make their job more difficult, and I believe that they're right in our own analysis of the bill. Madam President, for these reasons, I object to this request, but I reiterate, as I have over and over and over again to the House author, that I stand ready and more than willing to work with our colleagues in the House, along with Senator Cornyn and Senator Klobuchar, to ensure that this legislation moves forward. And to express my good faith on this, I'm going to make the following request. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration. This part here. Oh, I'm sorry. Therefore, I ask that the Senator modify his request. Let me start over so it's clear on the record. Therefore, I object to the original request for unanimous consent, and therefore I ask that the Senator from Texas modify his request such that the Durbin substitute amendment, the desk, be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Does the senator so modify his request?
Madam President, reserving the right to object. The senator from Illinois asks, why can't we change this bill? Well, first of all, this bill passed unanimously in the House. If we don't pass this bill today, it's dead, and the senator's objection to this unanimous consent request will effectively kill this legislation for this Congress, as he knows. And because we'll start a new Congress and we'll have to start all over from scratch. And I don't know when we decided to start outsourcing our authority as the Congress of the United States to the Department of Justice. The fact of the matter is the changes that the senator is suggesting would basically be just to instruct the U.S. Sentencing Commission to amend their federal sentencing guidelines to incorporate specific offense characteristics for any offense under this legislation. So basically, he's got another way to build a mousetrap that doesn't really change anything except the fact that he will effectively have killed this legislation, this Congress, and we'll have to start all over again. The reason why I'm here today, and while Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is here on the floor, is because this is a problem at schools in her legislative district where human traffickers come and they try to recruit teenage kids, girls mainly, high school and younger, into the sex trade. And we think it's appropriate that enhanced penalties attached to these criminals who commit these terrible crimes against our children in our schools. And unfortunately, by deferring to the Department of Justice's criticism, they're part of the executive branch. We're a co-equal branch of government. It's our job to say what the law is, and it's their job to enforce it. And so I'm sorry that the senator from Illinois believes that the Department of Justice's ideas should prevail over those of the collective wisdom of both branches of the Congress. And like I said, this bill passed unanimously in the House of Representatives, but because of his objection, it will effectively be dead for this legislative session, and I think it's a missed opportunity and a crying shame. I object to his request to modify my request for unanimous consent.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to executive session to considering the following nomination. Calendar number 1195, Richard Revesz, Administrator of the Office of Information. I've been instructed to hold this thought. Resuming my unanimous consent request that calendar number 1195, Richard Revesz to be Administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, the Office of Management and Budget, that the Senate vote on the nomination without intervening action or debate, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action and the Senate resume a legislative session.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report.
Nomination, Executive Office of the President, Richard L. Revesz of New York to be Administrator of the Office